Some nights in the wilderness are so quiet that when something breaks the silence, you know your life is about to change. The night had settled into a deep, unbroken stillness, the kind that only exists far from roads and human noise. Ranger Mark woke with a start. Unsure at first what had pulled him from sleep. The cabin was dark, the air cold enough to sting his lungs. Then he heard it again, a dull, careful sound against the door. Not wind, not a branch, something deliberate, measured, almost cautious, as if whatever stood outside understood the boundary it was crossing. He sat up slowly, heart tightening with each breath. Years in the field had taught him to respect instincts, especially the uneasy ones. He reached for the lantern and moved toward the door, every sense sharpened. Through the narrow window, moonlight revealed a shape that made his mind hesitate. Low to the ground, broad shoulders, a powerful body held strangely still. As his eyes adjusted, disbelief washed over him. A leopard stood on his porch, her golden coat dulled by dust and shadow. Only then did he see her swollen belly, heavy with life, and the way she shifted her weight to keep pressure off one hind leg. The fur that was matted and dark, the skin beneath raw and inflamed. She was breathing fast, sides heaving, exhaustion etched into every line of her body. This was no stalking predator. This was an animal pushed beyond endurance, lingering where no wild creature should ever linger. Fear came swiftly, sharp and undeniable. Leopards were silent hunters, fast enough to kill before a man could react. His training urged him to stay still, to keep the barrier between them closed. Yet another feeling rose beneath the fear, quieter but persistent. Responsibility. He had seen suffering before, understood how pain narrowed choices, until survival overruled instinct. The leopard lifted her head, and their eyes met through the glass. There was no threat in her gaze, no challenge, only a tense, searching awareness, as if she were measuring him not as prey, but as possibility. Mark's breath caught. He had spent his career protecting the line between wild and human worlds, knowing how fragile it was. Opening the door would blur that line in ways he could never undo. Closing it might seal her fate. The forest around the cabin seemed to press closer, the darkness alive with unseen movement. Cold air slipped through cracks in the walls, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine. He imagined the long journey that had brought her here, every step a gamble, every moment a risk. A pregnant leopard did not abandon cover lightly. Whatever pain she carried had left her no choice. Mark rested his hand against the door, feeling the solid wood beneath his palm. He thought of the laws he enforced, the warnings drilled into him since his first day as a ranger. He also thought of the quiet promise he had made to this land, to intervene when suffering threatened to tip into loss. Slowly, deliberately, he unlatched the door and opened it just enough to let the light spill outward. The leopard did not rush him. She did not bare her teeth or step forward. She waited, muscles trembling, eyes never leaving his face. In that pause, something unspoken passed between them. Mark stepped back, making space, lowering himself slightly, offering the room without command. With a movement, she crossed the threshold. Her paws touched the cabin floor, and her strength drained away. She sank down heavily, breath shuddering, body curling inward to protect the life she carried. Mark stood still as the weight of his choice settled over him. Mark moved carefully, as though the air itself might fracture if he acted too quickly. The leopard lay where she had collapsed, her breathing uneven but slowly settling, golden eyes following him with quiet intensity. He resisted the instinct to fill the silence, knowing that calm was not something to be spoken into existence, but earned through stillness. He closed the door behind him, not with a click but with controlled, deliberate motion, then stepped back again, giving her the space she seemed to require. The cabin felt smaller now, reshaped by her presence. The familiar smells of wood smoke and old coffee were overtaken by something wild and earthy, the scent of damp fur and forest soil clinging to her coat. Mark retrieved his medical kit from the shelf, the metal latch sounding far louder than it should have in the hush. He paused, watching for any sign of agitation. But she did not move. Her body remained tense, yet there was no threat in it, only endurance stretched thin. He knelt several feet away, lowering himself to her level, making his posture less imposing. Slowly, He placed the kit on the floor and opened it with exaggerated care. Every movement was meant to be seen, to be understood. When he lifted a clean cloth, he held it in both hands, palms open, waiting. The leopard's ears twitched, her gaze narrowing briefly, then easing. It was a small allowance, but it was enough. Mark spoke softly, not expecting her to understand the words, only the intent behind them. His voice was low and steady, the same tone he used with frightened hikers or injured animals caught in snares. He edged closer, inch by inch, until the injury on her hind leg was within reach. The wound was worse up close, the skin angry and swollen, likely scraped raw on rock during a desperate climb or fall. He felt a tightening in his chest, a mix of sympathy and awe at how far she had traveled in this condition. When he touched the cloth to her leg, she flinched, a deep rumble vibrating in her chest. Mark froze instantly, hand hovering, breath held. After a long moment, the rumble faded. She did not pull away. Trust, he realized, was not a gift freely given. It was a fragile agreement, renewed with every second that passed without harm. He cleaned the wound slowly, pausing whenever her muscles tightened, adjusting his pace to her tolerance. Sweat gathered at his temples despite the cold. The danger was never absent. It hovered just beneath the surface of every careful motion. Yet as the minutes stretched on, something shifted. Her breathing grew steadier. The tension in her shoulders eased, if only slightly. The cabin's silence softened, no longer sharp with fear, but weighted with concentration. At one point, she lowered her head to floor, resting her chin against the wood. It was not submission, but exhaustion finally given permission to exist. Mark felt the significance of the gesture settle over him. She was still wild, still powerful, but she had chosen to remain still. He wrapped the leg in a loose bandage, ensuring it would not restrict movement, then retreated again, restoring the distance between them. He dragged a thick blanket from his bed and placed it near the hearth, then stepped back. After a moment, she shifted, rising with effort and easing herself onto the fabric. She curled her body protectively, tail wrapped close, belly shielded beneath her. The sight carried a quiet weight, something intimate and deeply human in its familiarity. Mark sank into his chair and stayed there, watching over her as the night deepened. The danger had not vanished, but it had changed shape. In its place was a fragile calm, built not on control, but on patience. Morning arrived quietly, announced not by sound but by a thinning of the darkness. Pale light crept through the cabin window, settling softly over the worn floorboards, and the still form curled near the hearth. Mark stirred in his chair, muscles stiff, eyes heavy, yet alert in the way they had been all night. The leopard shifted as well, lifting her head and drawing a slow, steady breath, her body no longer trembling with pain or fear. She rose carefully, testing her injured leg with cautious weight. The swelling had eased, and though the wound was far from healed, it no longer burned with the same urgency. Her movements carried renewed purpose, guided by something older and deeper than exhaustion. Mark stood and gave her space, stepping back toward the wall. He understood the rhythm of this moment, without needing to name it. The wild was calling her home. She approached the door on her own, each step deliberate, tail low but relaxed. Mark reached out and opened it wide, letting the cool morning air flood the cabin. The scent of pine, damp soil, and distant water rushed in, reclaiming the space. Sunlight spilled across her coat, igniting the gold and shadowed rosettes that mark her as a creature born of forest and stone. She paused at the threshold, inhaling deeply, as if drawing strength from the world waiting beyond. For a brief moment, she turned her head and looked at him. There was no gratitude he could name, no gesture he could interpret with certainty. Yet something passed between them in that quiet exchange, a recognition shaped by shared vulnerability rather than expectation. He nodded once, a small acknowledgement, understanding that this was not a farewell meant to be held on to. She stepped outside, her paws sinking into the soft earth. The forest seemed to open for her, branches lifting, light filtering through leaves as she moved away from the cabin. Within moments, her form dissolved into shadow and green, becoming once again a part of the land that had shaped her. The silence returned, gentle and complete. Mark closed the door and stood still, listening. The cabin felt emptier now, yet altered, as if it carried a memory of breath and presence within its walls. He brewed coffee and sat at the table, watching the steam rise and vanish. His hand shook slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of what had passed. He had not saved her. He had not claimed a victory. He had simply allowed something rare to unfold. Later, as the sun climbed higher and the forest resumed its daily chorus, Mark stepped outside to resume his routine. Everything looked the same as it always had. The trail, the trees, the distant ridgeline. Yet he moved through it differently, aware now how thin the line was between worlds, how briefly it could soften when trust was offered without demand. In the weeks that followed, life returned to its familiar patterns. Patrols, reports, quiet nights beneath a sky scattered with stars. Still, the memory remained, in the way he listened more closely, in the way he paused before acting. He carried the knowledge that compassion did not always need witness or reward to matter. The forest reclaimed its silence, but something endured, not a bond be measured or proven, but an understanding that would follow him always, steady as a heartbeat, reminding him of one night when fear gave way to trust,